If you're watching this, you've probably just been assigned to read The Great Gatsby by your literature teacher, and you're trying to avoid actually reading the book, so you're just watching this instead. Go read the book. It's really good. But when you're done, come back and watch this and we'll talk about the novel. Okay, cool. Did you like it? Good. So you're probably wondering why this is called The Mediocre Gatsby, and it's because honestly Gatsby is not that great. Now you're probably thinking that I'm going to be talking about the villainous creature that is Tom Buchanan, what with his passionate and inaccurate rants about science and racism, his taking a mistress despite being married to the beautiful Daisy Buchanan, or the breaking of said mistress's nose. But making Tom the main problem of this novel would be way too easy, so instead I'm going to talk to you about Jay Gatsby. See, when most people read The Great Gatsby for the first time, they interpret it as a romance novel. They see the desperate measures that Gatsby goes to in order to win Daisy back, and they assume that he must love her deeply and truly, when really this isn't exactly the case. In order to determine that The Great Gatsby is not a romance novel, we need to look at the way in which Gatsby tries to win Daisy back. Rather than trying to learn anything about Daisy or reaching out to her in any way, he spends the 5 years that they're separated working as a bootlegger and doing other shady things we know nothing about, in order to amass an extravagant fortune that he then spends on a beautiful mansion in West Egg, and then proceeds to throw parties every single weekend, just hoping that Daisy will one day drop by. In a perfect world, Daisy shows up to one of his parties, sees that Gatsby has ascended to the upper crust just like her, and leaves Tom for him. There are so many problems with this that it's hard to find a place to start, but let's start with what Gatsby thinks will bring Daisy back to him. Generally, when we think about a man winning back the girl, we think about somebody so passionately in love that they'll do anything to get them back. They're hoping to get closer to the girl to make themselves seem more likable. Gatsby makes no attempt to get closer to Daisy other than by geographical location, since he buys a house right across the bay from hers. Even though when we meet Daisy, we learn that there's not really much to her, the fact that he doesn't even try to go to the effort to learn anything about her shows a lot about his priorities. When Gatsby tells Nick about the first time that he met Daisy, he talks about Daisy's house almost as much as he talks about her, which just adds to the idea that he's more in love with her wealth and her history than he is with her as a person. This concept is reinforced again when Gatsby talks to Nick after the party that Daisy finally attends.
Daisy leaves the party with Tom relatively early after a fight with Gatsby about their future. Gatsby is clearly distressed, saying, "She didn't like it. She didn't have a good time. I feel so far away from her. It's hard to make her understand." Gatsby talks to Nick about his plans for his and Daisy's future, to which Nick says, "I wouldn't ask too much of her. You can't repeat the past." "Can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can," says Gatsby.
It's very telling that Gatsby is so unsettled by the fact that his plan doesn't go exactly the way he wanted it to. His plan about how to get Tom out of the picture is another indication of how he really feels about Daisy. Several scenes later, we're taken to the Plaza Hotel, and this goes down.
Gatsby says to Tom, "Your wife doesn't love you. She never loved you. She loves me." Tom clearly believes that this is a blatant lie, given that he and Daisy have been married seemingly happily for 5 years. He begins interrogating Daisy about whether or not she actually loves him, bringing up examples from their marriage about times in which he believed that she loved him. Daisy is dying to bow out and eventually breaks, saying, "You ask too much. I love you now, isn't that enough? I did love him once, but I loved you too."
This scene is the most important aspect of Gatsby's attempts to get Daisy back. She is visibly uncomfortable throughout the entire scene, but he keeps pressuring her to tell Tom that she never loved him. If Gatsby really loved Daisy the way he says he does, it wouldn't matter that she'd spent the last 5 years with Tom. It would just matter that they're together now and she wants to be with him now. But the most important part of his plan is that she tells Tom that she never loved him to begin with. Gatsby has a habit of becoming very agitated when things don't go exactly the way they're supposed to. Daisy has to love his parties, she has to love his house, she has to want to get married and move into that house with him rather than run away. But most importantly, she has to love him and only him. Gatsby's fixation on repeating the past turns out to be his downfall. Nick explains it this way in chapter 6.
He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy. If he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was.
I'd like to take a moment to clarify that Gatsby's not an inherently evil person, at least not in the same way Tom is. He's just delusional. He's so used to being charming and having everything go his way and getting everything that he wants. But when the thing that he wants is another human being, he doesn't know how to make that work. The Great Gatsby is an amazing work of literature. Its language is beautiful, its symbolism is immaculate, its plot is fascinating, and F. Scott Fitzgerald is an amazing writer, but we should not aspire to be any of the characters in this novel. It's obvious that we shouldn't want to be the anticlimactic Nick, or the beautifully disastrous Daisy, or the blatantly awful Tom, but Gatsby is more complicated than that. He seems successful to us because he's wealthy and comfortable, but he's never truly happy the entire novel. He's so fixated on changing the past that he leaves himself no time to enjoy the present. I lied before when I told you that Gatsby wasn't great, because he was. Other people saw him that way. He was the personification of the American dream that this novel is so tied with. But he never saw himself as great. And honestly, that's worse than not being great at all. Hopefully this has helped you take another look at The Great Gatsby and interpret it on a different level, but take the skills you've learned here and apply them to your next novel you have to read. Holden Caulfield is not that great either.